Maybe you've felt it. You wake up one day and the life you built feels too small. Your friendships feel scripted. Your dreams feel borrowed. Your routines feel mechanical. Nothing is wrong, yet nothing feels truly live. That's the conflict no one teaches us to name. When your soul has outgrown your life, but your life hasn't caught up. A gap opens between who you are and who you're becoming. It's uncomfortable. You might even try to silence it, travel more, work harder, buy things, distract yourself, but the whisper returns. Stronger, clearer. Here's the controversial part. On the spiritual path, confusion is a sign of progress. Losing your sense of identity isn't failure, it's the doorway. Real awakening often looks like breaking down, like questioning everything, like feeling lost, emotional, raw. But that's exactly how the real journey begins. The personality cracks so the self can enter. And yet, there's a promise hidden in the chaos. If you follow this path with courage and awareness, you'll discover a version of yourself you were never allowed to meet, but always meant to be. Come. A self rooted in clarity, intuition, freedom, and inner authority. Not a life of escape, but a life of deep meaning. Over the next few minutes, we'll explore the 5 stages of spiritual awakening through Carl Jung's lens. From the first subtle disturbance to the profound union with the self. Along the way, you'll understand where you've been, where you are now, and what comes next. You might even realize you're further along than you think. And if you're willing to walk through each stage, you'll find that awakening isn't about leaving the world behind. It's about finally showing up in it, fully alive. The first stage is the calling, a subtle inner disturbance that almost goes unnoticed. It often begins like a quiet whisper in your bones, hinting that the meaning of life is deeper than routines, deadlines, and the noise around you. Jungian psychology would say this early murmur rises from the unconscious mind, where archetypes wait patiently to awaken. Somewhere inside, a small spark flickers, too faint to warm you, yet bright enough to make you pause. Dreams begin to shift, symbols revealing hidden maps, like secret routes forming behind your eyes. Déjà vu appears, tiny synchronicities explained only by sensation, not logic. Emotional awareness blooms at unexpected hours, asking softly, "Is there more?" This marks the beginning of spiritual awakening, where light and darkness sit side by side, curious. You often try to ignore this spark, brushing it off like a message you're not ready to read. Still, the power of the mind keeps nudging you, while you're at the grocery store, during a long drive, or right before sleep. Carl Jung would say the persona and shadow stir here, reminding you that inner transformation is rarely optional. If you try to silence it, the spark doesn't disappear. It smolders, turning into a persistent ache, like the wounded healer calling from within. Sometimes, you escape into work, romance, or late-night scrolling, but soon, dreams return, Jungian dream symbols, the repressed self knocking. The inner voice of the self never leaves. Restlessness blooms like oxygen feeding that spark. You look at your life, career, relationships, and notice how everything feels fine, yet strangely hollow. You feel drawn to depth psychology, the collective unconscious, and inner alchemy, though you can't explain why. You might pick up man and his symbols or search for videos about the meaning of life, the shadow in relationships, or psychological projection in love. Even music begins revealing hidden layers. Lyrics become portals. Consciousness stretches, and the unconscious mind slowly moves toward daylight. Spiritual awakening stops feeling like an idea and starts feeling like the spark is asking to become flame. Soon, the spark begins influencing your outer world. Places you once loved lose their charm. Conversations that used to excite you feel empty. Small talk becomes exhausting. You long for symbols and meaning. Synchronicity explained itself through strange encounters, meeting someone at the perfect moment, or stumbling across a sentence that feels written just for you. You begin noticing a pull toward healing the inner child, not only because of old wounds but because emotional alchemy begins where tenderness was once hidden. When confusion grows, journaling your dreams becomes a practical tool to decode messages from the unconscious mind and feed the spark with clarity. Eventually, you feel suspended between worlds, one foot in the familiar, the other wandering into mystery. Even simple tasks, cooking, texting, walking, feel symbolic, as if everything has a subtle glow beneath its surface. Psychological archetypes appear at the edges of your awareness, and you wonder whether you are the seeker or the wounded healer, maybe both. Conversations gain multiple layers, projection and perception blur. Some days feel magical, others unsettling, as if light and darkness swirl inside you. Yet deep down, the spark stays, warming, brightening. And as this quiet shift becomes impossible to deny, the shadow rises, waiting for the next stage. The second stage is the confrontation with the shadow, the moment when the spark from the first stage begins illuminating the darker corners of your unconscious mind. At first, you may feel unsettled, as if someone turned on a dim light in a basement you didn't know existed. Jungian psychology teaches that the shadow isn't evil, it's simply the repressed self, forgotten desires, buried fears, and emotions you pushed aside. Light and darkness within begin to wrestle, revealing how much of your life was shaped by unseen forces. The hero's journey always begins with a descent, and here, you start sensing what's been quietly directing your choices, especially the ones you regret. You might notice uncomfortable patterns resurfacing: jealousy, anger, insecurity. Shadow work means seeing these traits not as enemies but as guides. The power of the mind becomes evident when you realize these reactions aren't random, but deeply rooted in emotional alchemy. Conversations feel different. Projection and perception intertwine more visibly. Maybe someone at work bothers you, only for you to later realize they mirror parts of yourself you've rejected. The unconscious mind loves mirrors. This stage shows you that psychological projection in love, friendships, and strangers is simply your shadow speaking. It's humbling, sometimes funny, and strangely relieving. Then comes the return of your inner child, not as a memory, but as a presence. It may show up as sudden sadness, a tightening in your chest when someone raises their voice, or an inexplicable longing to be understood. You begin to sense that beneath the adult you've become lives a younger you who never felt fully seen. Healing the inner child here is not a neat process. It's a dialogue with yourself. You might notice images rising in your imagination, not random, but symbolic. A small hand reaching through darkness, a closed bedroom door, a broken toy, a missing seat at the table. These symbols reveal invisible knots formed in childhood, shaping how you love, fear, hide, and speak. Some symbols appear in waking moments, others in intuitive flashes. A house without windows, a hallway that never ends, each containing meaning, each pointing toward a forgotten emotional truth that wants to be held. As these symbols surface, inner conflicts intensify. You might feel torn between protecting your younger self and resenting them for being so needy. Part of you wants to surrender and feel everything. Another part wants to shut the door and walk away. The persona, the polished version of you that learned how to survive, clashes with the wounded aspects you buried. It can feel like an inner courtroom. The critic, the victim, the protector, the unseen child, all speaking at once. Sometimes you'll feel anger without knowing why. Other times, grief will rise like a wave. The unconscious mind isn't trying to punish you. It's trying to show you where you abandoned yourself. The conflict is the bridge. The symbol is the key. When you dare to listen, the child slowly emerges from the shadows, willing to trust again, but only when you stop trying to fix and simply learn to witness. This stage challenges every aspect of your identity. You begin seeing how your persona, the version of yourself you present to others, was built partly to hide what you feared would not be loved. You remember moments where you betrayed your own needs just to be accepted. Shadow integration techniques can help. Observing emotional triggers without judgment, writing letters you'll never send, or sitting quietly with uncomfortable feelings until they soften. Sometimes you laugh at what you find. The inner rebel, the forgotten artist, the child who just wanted to play. It's messy, oddly humorous, and shockingly honest. Little by little, the confrontation becomes less frightening. The spark from the first stage now feels like a small lantern guiding you through inner caves. Narcissism and the unconscious show up not as labels but as reminders of how delicate the human psyche is. Light and darkness behave like siblings, bickering, revealing, remembering. This is where you realize your shadow isn't a monster. It's simply a part of you that's been waiting to be acknowledged. And as you accept what you once denied, the boundaries of your old identity begin to soften, preparing you for the next stage, where something deeper must die. The third stage is the quiet dying of who you believed yourself to be, a gentle unraveling of the identity you've spent years building. It often begins subtly. You find yourself moving through familiar spaces, yet something feels slightly out of focus, as though life has lost a layer of color. Your morning routine continues, but a sense of detachment lingers, whispering that the meaning of life is no longer found in predictable rhythms. According to Jungian psychology, this is where the persona begins to crack. The unconscious mind nudges you toward what's beyond the mask. You sense that the story you've been acting out no longer fits, and the spark from earlier begins clearing space for something new. You notice yourself questioning things you once defended without hesitation. A conversation with a coworker feels oddly rehearsed, as if you're watching yourself from the outside. After a small achievement, instead of joy, there's a quiet emptiness, a subtle realization that validation no longer feeds you. Projection and perception begin to intertwine. You recognize traits in others that once bothered you are reflections of your own shadow. Archetypes in everyday life, the achiever, the caregiver, the diplomat, feel familiar but strangely distant, like figures you once played on stage. Inner transformation is no longer a concept. It's happening beneath your skin. Moments with loved ones feel different too. Your partner asks how you're doing, and you pause longer than usual, sensing the automatic response dissolving. A gentle comment touches a nerve you didn't know was raw, revealing old emotional contracts that shaped how you learned to love. While helping someone you care about, you sense a younger you beneath the surface, longing to be seen. The wounded healer rises. Sometimes you feel incredibly open, other times strangely numb, both part of the inner alchemy where light and darkness mingle. The unconscious mind brings symbolic moments, a childhood photo, a familiar scent, an image in a dream, each pointing to the deeper identity that waits beneath old layers. Inside, a subtle conflict begins. One part of you clings to old narratives, the reliable one, the strong one, the one who always knows what to do. Another part urges you to release the performance. It's uncomfortable because the roles once felt like survival. Now they feel like cages. You sense the collective unconscious rumbling beneath your feet, and for a moment, the meaning of life feels weightless. This discomfort is emotional awareness expanding, a psychological death that makes room for the self. Sometimes, humor breaks through. You catch yourself defending an identity you no longer believe in and laugh at the absurdity. Then, something loosens. You catch your reflection and sense a softness, not a mask. You sit with silence and it doesn't frighten you. It feels like home. The symbols that once flickered at the edge of dreams now appear in waking life. A bird perched alone, a bridge under fog, an open gate at dusk, reminders that transition is underway. You understand on a deeper level that you're not your title, your past, or the collection of roles you've performed to be accepted. The persona begins dissolving, and beneath it you glimpse the self, spacious, quiet, whole. And in that inner stillness, something begins preparing you for the next stage, where the scattered pieces will reorganize into a truer form. The fourth stage is the slow alchemy of turning inner lead into gold, not by force, but through presence. After the dissolving of your old identity, this phase begins quietly, like heat beneath metal. You sense that something dense within you, old beliefs, emotional armor, unprocessed memories, is softening. Jungian psychology would say this is where the unconscious mind and the conscious mind begin cooperating. The spark that once felt fragile now warms the system from within. You respond with more honesty, less fear. You notice complexity where you once wanted clarity. This is where light and darkness stop competing and begin learning each other's language, the beginning of true inner transformation. Here, the shadow is no longer an enemy. It becomes raw material for the work. What once felt heavy, jealousy, fear, insecurity, is now the lead being melted down. You hold it over the inner flame, asking what it's here to teach. Healing the inner child becomes less about fixing and more about listening. The parts of you that hid in shame slowly step forward, like metal revealing its true composition. Psychological archetypes start weaving together. The seeker, the wounded healer, the wise one. The individuation process becomes tangible. You learn that your darkness isn't a problem to solve. It's a waiting to be refined. Every emotion becomes potential gold. Daily life offers the furnace. A difficult conversation shows you how far you've come. Instead of shutting down, you stay open. When sadness arrives, you welcome it like rain that softens stubborn ground. Emotional alchemy at work. Symbols and meanings show up everywhere. A feather on your path, someone speaking truth unexpectedly, a recurring dream of fire and river. Synchronicity explained itself through timing that feels too elegant to be random. The power of the mind feels less like pressure and more like guidance. You find yourself forgiving more freely, not because pain is forgotten, but because you understand how the human psyche is shaped beneath the surface. As this integration deepens, your inner world becomes a workshop. The protector in you softens, the one who hid begins to speak. The part that judged begins to understand. Threads of gold appear where there was only darkness. You learn to hold contradictions, strength and tenderness, joy and grief. Emotional awareness becomes your crucible. What goes in heavy comes out luminous. You stop trying to fix others. Instead, you witness them, trusting their own process of turning lead to gold. You recognize how narcissism and the unconscious often rise from unmet needs, lead that was never given heat. You respond with more compassion, less fear. Then comes the realization that all of you, the light and the shadow, the child and the elder, the awkward and the wise, belong at the same table. The unconscious mind speaks through symbols, a gold ring, a lit candle, a bridge across fog. These moments remind you that transformation doesn't erase your past, it transmutes it. The persona becomes lighter, transparent, no longer armor, just fabric. You feel closer to the self, that inner gold that's been waiting beneath the weight of old stories. And as the metals inside you continue to refine, a new horizon appears, guiding you toward the final stage, the quiet union with your deepest truth. The fifth and last stage is the quiet union with the self, a moment when the inner and outer world begin moving with a shared rhythm. It doesn't feel like becoming someone new. It feels like remembering who you were before life taught you to fragment. After the long inner alchemy that turned lead into gold, you begin sensing your essence in every breath. The unconscious mind no longer whispers in riddles. It speaks in clarity. Inner transformation feels less like striving and more like unfolding, a gentle revelation. You notice that the self is not above you or outside you, but within, steady as a heartbeat. Jung would say the individuation process has taken root. Spirit and personality begin walking in one direction. In this state, the world appears unchanged, yet everything feels different. You see light and darkness as partners, each teaching what the other cannot. Symbols and meaning decorate ordinary life. The way sunlight rests on your desk, the pattern in your morning walk, the unexpected kindness of a stranger. Your intuition grows strong and quiet, no longer dramatic, no longer uncertain. It feels like an inner compass, a knowing that doesn't shout, but never lies. You stop chasing purpose and begin living from it. Your presence itself becomes aligned with meaning. Life no longer feels like a puzzle. It feels like participation in a larger story, guided by consciousness and supported by the collective unconscious. Relationships shift without effort. You no longer perform a persona. You show up as you are, without over-explaining or shrinking. Shadow work becomes a natural part of daily life. When old patterns arise, you witness them with lucidity rather than judgment. Conversations deepen without force, and listening becomes a sacred act. You feel tenderness toward others because you recognize the archetypes playing through them: the hero, the wounded healer, the child, the seeker. You respond not from fear, but from clarity. Even when others project their unconscious onto you, you hold steady, knowing it's about them, not you. Compassion stops being a concept. It becomes a way of breathing. Intuition now guides action. It leads you to places, people, and work that feel alive. You sense when to move and when to wait. Synchronicity explained itself as the natural language of the self, a meeting, a phrase on a billboard, a dream that finishes a conversation begun while awake. You begin noticing how life rearranges effortlessly when you step out of resistance. Purpose stops being a destination and becomes a current beneath your feet. You inhabit your gifts without apology: creativity, empathy, wisdom, humor, and they become tools for serving something greater. Healing the inner child feels like holding hands, not fixing. It's a reunion, not a rescue. You feel whole, not because life is perfect, but because you no longer need it to be. Eventually, service to the collective arises naturally. You don't wake up thinking, "How do I help the world?" You simply live from truth, and that helps. The wounded healer in you reaches others not by preaching, but by embodying. You speak less but say more. Your presence becomes medicine. There's a feeling of surrender, not passive, but lucid, where you trust the self to guide your steps. Spirit and personality move together. Decisions feel clean, aligned. The meaning of life no longer feels hidden. It reveals itself through connection. You begin to see life not as yours alone, but as a collaboration between you and the greater web of existence. And in that quiet, open clarity, awakening feels less like an ending and more like a beginning, an invitation to live in truth, moment by moment. Now that you've walked through these 5 stages, pause for a moment and ask yourself, where are you on this journey? Are you just beginning to feel the subtle inner disturbance? Are you confronting your shadow? Or have you begun the quiet work of integration? Remember, awakening isn't about escaping life. It's about learning to move through it with clarity, courage, and compassion. Nothing you've experienced was accidental. Every emotion, every symbol, every moment of confusion was guiding you toward a deeper version of yourself. The unconscious mind has been speaking to you all along. Now you know how to listen. So take what you learned here and live it. Let your intuition guide your next decision. Ask your shadow what it's trying to show you. Make space for the inner child. Look for synchronicities. And above all, stay curious. The meaning of life isn't found in certainty, but in exploration. I'll leave you with a few questions to reflect on. What old identity are you ready to release? What part of you is asking to be seen? Who might you become if you stopped performing and started listening? Share with me in the comments. I would love to know which stage resonated with you most deeply. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And if this journey spoke to you, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next step on this path. We are exploring these mysteries together, one truth at a time.